Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome again to another Event Icons. Will Curran here, and today we're talking about physical safety and security at events. I'm extremely passionate about this topic because we named it one of our, if not, I would consider the top trends in the events industry right now is that there is definitely major issues and things that we need to fix when it comes to safety and security at events. So I brought two amazing experts, which we'll introduce very, very shortly, to kind of talk about the best practices and how you can implement this into your events right away and making sure your events are super duper safe. So I don't want to wait anymore, and I want to get into this topic. So let's roll that intro and get rocking and rolling.
It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #Event Icons, presented by Endless Events, the show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. Just go to www.event-icons.com to ask questions. Our iconic guests will answer them live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better the conversation. So please help share #Event Icons on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is #Event Icons.
Again, we're back again with that awesome topic of physical security and safety at events, and I am joined by two legends in the events industry who I think are going to be able to speak to this topic way better than me. I want to quickly introduce them and give them a chance to tell their story. So let's get rocking and rolling. First, we are joined by Mark Breen. Mark is the go-to expert, I think, across the world when it comes to event safety and security. And this guy has got so many amazing accolades to his name, and we've been trying to get him on the show for so long because this is just such an amazing topic, and he is a pro. So I'm super duper excited. Joining us today from Dublin, Ireland, Mark Breen. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I feel like you should just go everywhere with me and give me an intro like that every room I step into. That was amazing.
You can just carry me around in your pocket, and then I can be the token like ginger American for you.
That would be super. I can make that work.
Amazing. Mark, thank you again for joining us. And we'll definitely jump right in a second. We'll jump into your story. But before we do that, I want to introduce our second guest, Alan Kleinfeld. Alan is actually, I love his one sentence bio, and I literally just have to read this sentence because it was the shortest, most effective bio. And I think it will also raise the most amount of questions as well, is that he considered himself a meeting planner, but with a police badge. How many other people can say that they're a meeting planner with a police badge? I think you're probably the only one, Alan.
Let's hope.
Tuning in from our broadcasting live from Charleston, South Carolina. We're going to really dive into it. And I love the police perspective when it comes to this topic. I've done a couple panels on this, and I know that you're ready to lay down the law for this. So I'm super duper excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us, Alan.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. All right. So I want to give a chance for you guys to tell your stories because that is one thing I think is so much fun for people to get a perspective as far as what got you to the point where you guys became such experts in this topic. So we'll start off with Mark. Mark, can you tell everyone a little bit of what got you into the events industry and kind of what got you to the point today where you became so involved in this topic? Woo. And I think we lost Mark. Oh, there we go. He's back.
Am I back?
Yeah. You're all good to go.
This is because you see, I am in our storeroom in our office in Dublin in Ireland, so you never know what things are in the walls here that might interfere with that signal. I guess I studied events. So when I was in college, I was doing business, I was doing marketing. I worked part-time in events, running events in the college I was in. At the same time, I was working security, just normal nightclub security here in Ireland, in a city called Limerick, which was quite scary at the time. There was a lot of gang stuff going on and all that. So I was at the sharp end of that for a number of years. Loved the event stuff. Ended up doing a postgrad in PR and event management, thinking I would work in PR, to be honest. And then as concerts and big festivals started to come to Ireland in, say, the early 2000s, an event and security licensing came into Ireland as well. So to work security, you now had to have a license. I was running a team in the university I worked in of students who would do safety and security work for the student events. And when that licensing came in, we were one of the first classes to go through and get licensed as security. So that same year, big festivals and concerts started coming to Ireland, and I had this notion that I should find out who was contracted to provide all that security and explain to them that I had 30 students that were among the first licensed in the country. So that was kind of the start of it. We did that. I still work with that company to this day. That started us all off working on those events back in the early 2000s. They're a supplier to us now. My mother will tell you that the reason I ended up in this work is I have a special needs sister who I was minding all my life. And then I was a lifeguard and training lifeguards. And when you add that up with the security background, you end up with me running a safety consultancy specializing in crowds and events. That's her version of the story, and she's probably not far off, to be fair. Everything I do seems to be about minding other people. So that's the short version of it. I'm still in my office at 9:30 at night. I'm working on the Trump visit. He's coming here next week, and we've a huge thing in Saudi Arabia at the minute that has me here at 9:30. And I absolutely love what we do. I think it's serious. It has to be serious. But unless you can enjoy doing it, this stuff, I would lose sleep at night if I didn't really enjoy what I was doing.
Yeah.
So I come from a slightly weird perspective in that I get the seriousness of it. I understand the responsibility. I understand when I have to pay my insurance bill, the responsibility. But genuinely really enjoy it and tend not to lose sleep over it. We approach it the right way and we try and keep everyone safe. And when I see happy people at events, that's what keeps me going.
Amazing. I think you bring up a super solid point too about that it's super duper serious, but yet we have to enjoy while we do it. Otherwise, like if we only allow the fear to stay, why even have events, right? So
Yeah.
we have to figure out a way to make them good so that everyone else doesn't have to worry about it.
Yeah, well, the way I look at what we do is I don't want people going to events I'm involved in worrying about safety and thinking about security. I want them to go focus on the show and trust that me and the people like me and people like Alan are working on these things to keep them safe. They shouldn't have to think about it. If you're thinking about it or if you see something that makes you think about it, I think we failed a little bit. So I don't want people in fear. I want professionals working so you don't have to think about that fear. Just go to the show, enjoy the show, and have people like us in the background making sure you don't have to think about any of that stuff.
Awesome. And I think that obviously it took a while to get to that point where you built up systems to be able to do it. So I'm really excited to hear from your perspective how you can get to that point where you don't have to worry about it at all. So lots more coming for that. But before we do that, Alan, I got to tell your story and what the story that we were talking a little bit pre-show about, how you became a meeting planner with a police badge.
Yeah, sure. Just real quick, I like what Mark said there. What you all ended on, it is really important that the attendees don't really see what's going on in the background and are not worrying about any kind of safety issues. But my story is I fell into meeting planning. People of my generation, people my senior, as seasoned as me, we fell into meeting planning. So I started in the early to mid 1990s, just doing kind of like meet and greets and things like that at a college, at a state university. And that kind of just grew into planning meetings, annual conferences for associations and nonprofits in Boston and DC, things like that. I fell into it. My degree is in English, professional writing. And an opening came up where there was an opening at a place in Boston where part of the job was editing and writing, and the other part was organizing these events. And I was like, I'll do that. The safety part came a little later, moved to DC, and we were living in DC when 9/11, the attacks on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center happened. And the apartment we were living in, it actually was on a hill overlooking the Pentagon, so we could see it burn at night. And it was one of those things where, it was surreal, and I'm sure the rest of the world felt so. But you could smell it where we were living, and you could see it, and you could, it was one of those things where after it happened, the day it happened, the day that evening, the city was empty. It was almost as if a bomb had gone off and everyone had just vacated. Wasn't a single car on the freeway, nothing. And I got angry and I said, I don't want anything like this to happen again, and I'm going to try to do something to do that. So I found out, someone said, well, go be a cop, give up meeting planning and go be a cop. And I didn't want to just give up meeting planning. I still like meeting planning. But if it turns out that the Arlington police, where Arlington, Virginia, right outside of DC, has a volunteer program where you can be like a reserve police officer. You can volunteer to do that. DC has one. There's actually several agencies all around the DC area where you can volunteer to help the community in that regard. So I signed up, and it was my hobby, and I kept it separate from meeting planning. And there was meeting planning over here and policing over here, and they were not going to meet. And then eventually they met. The agency I worked for said, hey, we want to do an annual dinner. Can you help us plan this event? I said, sure. But I did that, and it came full circle. And as I got more and more involved in meeting planning and more involved in safety, it got to an apex where it was like these two need to go together. And so for the last several years, I've been doing consulting, teaching, writing on event safety. And so the volunteer thing actually turned into a paid job. I worked for a little town called Folly Beach, which is 20 minutes outside of Charleston, and I'm what they call an ordnance officer. So I have a badge and a gun and a uniform, and I'm certified by the state. And I help out mostly in the office. I do a little bit of dispatching, I do a little bit of training, I do a little bit of paperwork for the chief. But when the summer comes, we're a tourist town in the summer, or we have festivals throughout the year, Taste of Folly, things like that, where the roads are closed. I put on my uniform and put on my cap, and I'm Officer Kleinfeld. And that's where I am.
So cool. I think such a cool perspective to have too, because a lot of people tend to think it's like they always make jokes. I mean, I don't know if everyone makes jokes about this, but I know that whenever we were playing events and there was always these massive costs, and the police or security or fire was saying, here's all the reasons what you need to do, and you're just seeing dollar signs rack up and
That's right.
logistical things that come, and you're just thinking to yourself like, well, they don't know what events are like, they don't understand. Obviously you want to make sure it's a safe event, but you're one of the few people who does fully understand both worlds.
Right. And that's changing. And we can talk about that a little later, but that's changing, where I met a police officer for the city of Charleston, and they have the bridge run every year, and I forget 20,000 some people. And that one officer over the years has evolved to where he is now part of like the whole planning team, so that the food areas can be safe, and the bridge can be safe, and the parking garages can be safe, and the whole thing is now evolved to where it's a real team effort. So this one police officer I'm thinking of, he could say he's a meeting planner. he's no CMP, but or CNN. But yeah, it's starting to evolve the way, and I've actually gotten to get a little more involved in it, because the beach community where I am in Charleston as a whole also has these hurricanes coming, just hurricane season, June 1st to the end of the year. We have an emergency operations center, and I've gotten to be part of that and seen how the whole emergency planning from the first sight of a named storm and how that goes through from.
Wow. All right. I want to dive into this because I've done a panel like just even like a month ago where we had this topic, and there was just so much to cover. We didn't get it all done in an hour, and I want to make sure we jam pack this episode with as much tactical tips that people can put into their events. So let's start off with I'm going to jump around and start off with, what are all the things that people need to be thinking about? So I think everyone knows that security is important, right? Like, I don't think we have to convince anybody that. If anyone thinks that security is not important, then probably read our trends guide, or, I think probably we need to get you in a different job. But security is really, really important for events. So what are all the things that people need to be thinking about? So I know there's a massive list of check boxes and things like that, but let's start off very, very slowly, maybe kind of going back and forth about all the things that people need to be thinking about when it comes to events, when it comes to security that they might not be thinking about. So I'll let either one of you jump on it.
The first thing that comes off the top of my head is realizing that you need to do something. I love the fact that Mark is in Europe, because that perspective is going to be very interesting, even for me, because almost all of my planning is here in the US, and a lot of our planning has to do with active shooters and people with guns. And I think it's a different mindset in the United States than it is in Europe. But the one thing I think is that more planners need to realize a plan is needed, and that it's not, they don't have to do it all on their own. And to that extent, I see small meetings in small cities all around when I'm going around speaking, and they don't do anything, nothing at all. It's just like it was in big cities, 15, 20 years ago before 9/11. And it hasn't caught up to those places yet. And my fear is that something's going to happen in one of these smaller towns or one of these smaller hotels or one of these smaller convention centers, and the planners will just be shocked. So I think they need to realize that safety has to be part of the planning.
I love it. Mark, what's one thing that people need to be thinking about?
I think people need to think in terms of, and Alan brought it up, like the threat level and the reality of attacks in Europe, and especially in Ireland where I am, versus where you guys are. So I speak at a good few conferences, and lately some of the content I've been doing a lot of is something I call real risks versus topical threats. So you get what happened in Vegas, and everyone is now suddenly worrying about a shooter from up high.
That's right.
I'd imagine, especially in the States, you're thinking about that a lot, because that's what's just happened. When the vehicle attacks were happening around Europe a few years ago, everyone's now putting hostile vehicle mitigation barriers everywhere. And I do a session regularly where I'm talking about, what I see all the time? I've never seen a shooter. I've never seen a vehicle attack. But what I have seen on every single event I go to are trip hazards that don't need to be there.
That's right.
I see stages built badly and unsafely. I see people during the build and bump periods building stuff unsafely in wearing cons, wearing flip-flops, not wearing high vis, not secured when they're rigging. And I'm trying to bring people back to that stuff. The chances of getting, the chances of any of these things, the chances of a shooter, the chances of vehicle attacks, they're still so small. The risk is tiny for your individual event, relatively speaking. Someone is far more likely to get hurt against a barrier because it wasn't secured properly, or one of your workers gets hurt during a build period. So while I'm not saying don't think about the other stuff, and even here in Ireland, I mean, we've traveled to the UK to do training on event counterterrorism stuff and all that, because I know I'm responsible for that stuff. But realistically, blocked fire exits are a bigger thing here. Trip hazards from cabling are bigger. I'm seeing more people hurt that way. The woman who does a run, we have runs that happen in the dark here. It's a real gimmicky thing at the minute, and they fall over in the dark. I mean, that's how people are getting hurt. So I would always say, don't get caught up in the latest thing. There are things there all the time that are putting people at risk and making your event less safe, and focus more on them consistently. And then if there's a credible threat, or if there's something new that will potentially happen your actual event based on your risk assessment, focus a bit on that too. But think about all that normal stuff. The normal stuff is still there.
That's an awesome point, and I'm glad you said that. Because when I'm doing any kind of speaking or whatnot, I tend to use scenarios that are based on things like what you just mentioned: a trip hazard, fire hazard, things like that. I mean, people are trained on active shooter and whatnot in the U.S. Now they know the run, hide, fight scenario. But I say that all the time, is that you do a risk assessment. You make a plan around that, but your trip hazards, your food illnesses, your measles outbreaks, things like this are probably going to be a lot more impactful on your event than something like what you just said. It's more of Americans are really good at reacting and sometimes not so good at being proactive.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you had mentioned the difference between the States and Europe potentially, and you've just hit on a huge one there, which is you guys have run, hide, fight.
Yes, we do.
And not even in Ireland, but in the UK, where we take our lead from on all of this stuff, they have run, hide, tell. So it's a psyche thing. You guys have the fight in there, whereas
right.
which we all understand makes perfect sense.
We're Americans, man. Come on.
You're Americans, yeah. And over here, that doesn't even come into it. It's run, hide, tell. So it's get the word out. It's warn other people. And again, the UK have done a good bit of stuff on that. There's some great stuff coming out of the UK, because again, they would be a bigger target than than Ireland would be. But another point I'm always making, which is very Ireland specific, is the harder a target the UK makes itself, the more vulnerable we're getting day by day. Because no one thinks about this stuff too much in Ireland. We don't have these things happen here, touch wood. So it's like everything else in the world. Until it does happen here, most people aren't planning for it or thinking about it. And like I said, we have President Trump coming here next week at short notice that we have to do a load of work for. And because he's the principal, that brings with it a completely different threat scenario for us that normally doesn't exist in Ireland. So it all comes back to, if I was I think we're going to be talking about number one tips later, and my number one tip always is it's risk assessments. Everything has to be driven by a risk assessment done by someone experienced and competent. They'll be different. Alan will do a different risk assessment to I will for the exact same event. Our threat, our happiness and our threat levels and what we're comfortable with will be completely different. So there's never a one safety guy versus another safety guy thing. This is my experience tells me, like if I've been in a fire, if I've had an event where there's a fire, I'm probably going to be big on fire risk. You know, if I worked an event where there was a shooter, I'm probably naturally going to be bigger on shooter stuff than Alan might be or whatever. That's all natural. But it has to be driven by, everything has to be driven by a risk assessment. Everything.
I agree, and you need good information and intelligence in some cases for that risk assessment. And I like the fact that Mark mentioned we would have slightly different versions of it. Which one of the questions I get from planners is, well, can't we just do one template and be done? And I would love to say, yeah, here's how you can make every meeting in the world safe. But you got your different people, different weather, different locations, different venues, different times of the year. You just can't. Each event has to be assessed for what it is.
And look at that sensibility pervades everything. We run a series of industry events, and we had one today where it was all about medical provision for events. Mm-hmm. So we had private medical companies, we had people from the health service executive, the government body and everything on panels here. And that was one of the strongest things. It's a 3-hour thing we do. And that was one of the strongest things that came out of it from everyone on that panel, was that there's a template to work off. But there's no set answer to this. My event that's the running event for 10K versus your event that's a running event doing 10K or 10 miles, they're going to be different. For loads of reasons, the risk is different, which is why, like, having a lovely risk matrix and someone with a good logo who filled it in is one thing. You really want to be looking at, and that's from me because I think we have a lovely logo, but you really want to be looking at who has done it. What is their experience? One of the medical operators today said, and he said he'd probably get in trouble with it from competitors, and that was, don't look at the company whose logo is on it. Look at the person who's written it. What have they done? Did they actually write it? If something comes out of Safe Events office, people rank it somewhere in their heads. But to be fair, if I got a junior person in here to do it, it shouldn't hold the weight it would hold if I did it. So you have to look at all that stuff. It has to be done by someone competent. At the end of the day, someone can go online, find an event management plan we wrote for a massive event and could copy it. But the value is in who did it. So have good safety people, have good people writing these plans, then they hold weight. It's easy copy something that you find online and tick a box, but it'll hold no weight. It only holds weight based on the people who've developed it. And there are better people than me, and I'm sure there are worse people than me. But that's what it's about. It's about the person that wrote it and what their credentials are, because heaven forbid you're in front of a judge or a court or a jury. That's what's going to be scrutinized, is the guy that actually wrote it or the lady that wrote it. What's her background? Why did she get to write that? And if bad things happen, bad things happen. But if it was done right, if it was done well by an experienced person, this is kind of the reason I tend not to lose too much sleep over the scale of stuff we're involved in. We're doing a thing in Saudi that will see maybe 4 or 5 million people over 40 days. Like, if that's not going to have me losing sleep, theoretically, I don't know what would. But we use the same systems, the same processes, and it tends to work.
So there's a lot of great questions coming in from the audience already. And what's funny is I've heard that statement before, though, from many people, is that if I build this plan, if I could go in front of a judge or the media, I think we actually mentioned this on one of our episodes, and I'll have to link it down before, when we had the head of capital events for the state, basically said, like, if I can defend my choice in front of the media or in front of, a judge, then that's when I know that I feel confident that I've made the right thing. And I think that's a great way to think about when you're building your plan. Would I feel confident that the decision I made, could I do that in front of the media or a judge? And I think that's a great answer. So you guys talked a little bit about the crisis plans. And I know you said there's no quick template for doing it, and don't just steal one we've done for a massive event and put our name on it. But Heather in our audience has a really awesome question, which is, how do you start creating this? I think for someone who is looking to become an expert like you, Mark and Alan, how would you guys recommend? What are the sort of things that you think that you should start with? And then what's your process as far as then customizing it and putting it all together in the end run? Other than, obviously, I think the good choice would be just like, hey, let's write a check to a management company. Hey, take care of this. Who's really good at this. But let's say someone wants to start moving this in-house. What is your recommendations for them as far as things that you guys would want to see on that plan, and how do you guys build it out?
So I don't know much about this event that she's asking about. Is this a 300-person meeting in a Hyatt in downtown Denver, or are we talking so citywide, things like that? But I'll start with the same kind of advice I give most people is, you don't do it by yourself and feel overwhelmed. Just start with one thing. So maybe it's the site selection. If it's one venue, one hotel, 300-person hotel in a downtown, you can meet with the security staff of the hotel. You can find out what their plan is. You can do a check of the fire exits and find out where the evacuation routes are. You can make sure there's well-lit night spots. The parking lots are lit well at night. You can make sure they use video cameras on the lobby. You can, those sorts of like simple things that you might get the idea of just watching a TV show or a movie are actually practical good things. You can just walk in, do a site visit with the security personnel, and that would probably take a load off. And that's one thing that'll get that whole safety ball rolling to do other things. If it's a larger meeting, and I bet Mark can probably talk more to this point, but that's where I'm going to get my first responders involved. There might be some involvement with the convention bureau or the tourism office, things like that. And I might bring them in to make sure that the venue can hold a citywide that accommodates that size of a meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. It can be really overwhelming when you're starting at first, but look at what resources are there.
That's right.
Who's done stuff, assuming you have time on this, who's done stuff there before? Has similar been done? Are there, like I said, there's nothing wrong with looking at other people's plans online if you can get hold of them. There's nothing wrong with asking people for help. You'll have actual, municipal or state resources. There'll be a guy in the cops who looks at terrorist stuff that you're allowed to go talk to. Could be a convention bureau, something like that. My starting point would always be, look at what's already out there that you might be able to start with. Do your homework. You might see something in that plan. You might see something that guy said. You might go to that industry event where you got loads of good tips. Start putting the picture together. And then my next step would be, take a run at it. Do it roughly, do it loosely, put your headlines together, put your chapters together, and find someone to run it by. We're great believers here in my company of helping others run safer events. We spend a lot of time building resources, spending money on putting stuff out there for free, making videos to help explain capacity, how we figure out capacities and stuff to people. We're very conscious there's an awful lot of people running events that will never have the inclination nor budget to involve the likes of us. But if we can do small things to help. So I won't speak for everyone else in the industry, but I've had people go, look, we run a small event. We'll never have the money to involve you guys, but would you throw your eye over something for me? And I'll happily do that if I have time. And I always say the worst thing that happens with me is it takes me a day or two to come back because we're busy. But I'll do that, and I'll only stop short of something or advising or putting my insurance or my neck on the block. Right. But as regards, I see where you're going with that. That's a good idea. Have you considered this, that? We're all happy, I think, to help in that way. So it can be overwhelming, but see what resources are out there. Don't reinvent.
I was going to say it just to roll onto that. You had mentioned, Mark, just go, throw yourself into it. And I was going to say, I think that actually is very. The planners will find out they know more than they think they do. I've said this for a long time. Those who are overwhelmed or afraid or don't know where to begin, your skill set as a planner, you already know some of this stuff. You already know to tape down extension cables already, and you know not to hire an AV company that's not going to do that. So things like that are already there. So I agree to that. The other thing I was going to say is think about it from the perspective of what you would want if you were an attendee or you were there with your kids on vacation. What kind of safety would you want there to be? Would you're going to want to make sure that your children are safe, that the food is not contaminated, that the restaurant gets the proper municipal code to serve fresh ingredients and things like that. So throw yourself into it is great. And I think also think about it from the perspective of the attendee.
I think you guys bring up
the other thing.
Go ahead, Mark. Go.
I was just going to say, the other thing is, while I would advocate looking at other people's stuff, talk to some experts, look at things online. Like, I agree. There is no 100% correct approach to any of this stuff. There isn't an event management plan template that's perfect, and if you do it that way, you get a star, you get an A grade. Like, you might have your own ideas, you might tweak something, you might change things. It's all legit as long as you have logical thought behind it. And it sounds serious, but like, think of the judge, think of the media, as you were saying. If you can justify why you're doing it and document your thought process, it's unlikely to be wrong. Someone else can go, well, I wouldn't have thought of it that way, or I'd have come to this conclusion. But that's another event professional just approaching something slightly differently. So don't be afraid to research, learn, find what's out there, and put your own spin on it. And when you get confident, maybe you have a better way of doing it. And in 5 years' time, someone's finding your plan and going, that's solid. I like that. I like that approach. And again, look at what events these people are working on. So whether you might have done it the same way as them, if they're getting a load of permits for a load of massive events, they must be doing something right. The authorities must like what they're doing, but that's not to say you can't improve on it.
I'm just curious, Mark, do you know, so we have in the United States a federal agency, FEMA, Federal Emergency Management. Do you have an equivalent of that? We're in Ireland?
We wouldn't have an equivalent that's of the same profile. We do have an emergency management framework.
You do? Okay.
It wouldn't be as well publicly known as FEMA with you guys. Okay. But the resources are there, the meeting, the teamwork is there. Yeah, it exists. But it wouldn't be as public as what you guys have with FEMA.
Right.
And
I was just curious
because it's not been exercised too much, I suppose. But it's there, and there's some great people involved in it.
I was curious because one of the things you mentioned, which I also think is a good idea, is to look at resources or go find a plan that already exists. And one of the things I mentioned, as you mentioned, is that there's no single one right plan. And one of the resources I often give, especially for emergency planning for weather events or disasters, is FEMA. And they have in the US, they have a ton of information out there for people to download at whim. But it's all different. It's all different, and it will eventually all change.
Yeah, but again, that stuff is out there. And I've looked at FEMA stuff, And again, like I said, in Ireland, we tend to look to the UK a lot. There's a load of resources that just because they're born out of a different jurisdiction doesn't mean
that's
70, 80, 90% could help you and be applicable to you.
That's right.
And when globally there can be, in some respects, a lack of guidance in events in general, and there's no real rule book. You have to look around and find these things. I know the Event Safety Alliance in the States is becoming a stronger body now, and they're basing a lot of their stuff on the Green Guide and stuff out of the UK. So these things develop from somewhere. No one really reinvents the wheel. So look around. The internet is your friend. Social media is your friend. Ask people. If someone asks me for resources, I'm probably going to point them towards something.
That's right.
I'd imagine if someone asks Alan, he'll point them towards something. We're all here. We're all in the same boat. We were all in your position trying to write these for the first time.
That's right.
And we still don't have them right. We don't have them perfect. We never will,
Yeah. People, it's funny because sometimes I get you don't want to let me know because you want me to hire you. And I'm like, no, I want you to know that safety is priceless. Here, take this resource and, go with God.
I'm not looking to retire early on my business.
Right. That's right.
I need to pay bills. I'd like to live a comfortable life, but it's not about the money. For me, it's and that's why we spend a lot of what we make running events that cost me money for 30 people to be in a room, and we record them so they can be used as content on event management courses in the UK. Like, these things are costing me $4,000 and $5,000 a pop. There might be 40 people in the room. It's not about making money on everything. I'd sooner share the knowledge. You still get the work. We're too busy anyway. So I'm all about sharing that knowledge, whether it's online or we go to colleges and teach for free. As long as I'm not sacrificing client delivery or service because I'm off to a college for a day to teach the next generation of event managers, that is part of what we want to be doing.
Oh my gosh, there's so much good stuff you guys have. One thing I think a really major point that you made that I want to reiterate, because I've heard this a million times too, is the plans tend to already exist. They're just in different places. So use what's already there. I think a lot of times we go into this thinking we have to build it all from scratch, but go to your venue and say, hey, what's the safety plan that you have involved? Hey, security company, what's the safety plan that you have? And look, you can bring this all together to bring it all together. There's so much good stuff. I shared a ton of the resources you guys are linking to, things like the Event Safety Alliance. Mark, you had a link to some videos on there as well. I also found a guide from FEMA for special events management, all just good education stuff. I want to dive into, we talk a little bit about the team. We start like hinting a little bit about, but obviously the team is really, really important. What's your guys' like dream team for who you would have in a room to talk about this stuff and that you think needs to be a part of the conversation?
Go for it, Mark.
Sorry, like it's funny you're asking stuff that it's so fresh for me because of this event we just had today, talking about a lot of it. The industry here is amazing in that over the last few years, and I think it's personality driven. So in the health service, in the fire service, there are people involved at high enough levels now that get it, that are happy to sit around these tables, that understand events and the risks involved and want to help plan safer ones. I mean, I would tend, and I'm not a fan of massive meetings or long meetings, but I mean, we would have meetings for big events at starting out where everyone from, the waste managers, the environmental people for the city, everybody's in there at the start. And as things progress, their box is ticked, they're happy, they stop coming to meetings, maybe they'll email a query, whatever, but they're in there from the start. And for me, it's about, I would sooner have too many people and let them decide for themselves, look, this doesn't really impact me, I don't need to be here. Rather than miss something simple. So when we do these meetings, we kind of tend to invite anyone we think it might impact, and they can decide if it will or won't. And that way, I think we've cast the net as wide as we can. But I mean, simply like the security guys, your medical guys, front of house staff, people on the ground dealing with stuff I'll never see from a control room. You have to be getting their input in that planning process. You're going to miss something. If I have to stay in event control for an entire event, I'll think it ran smoothly, and I might discover the next day that it's because my team on the ground headed off an awful lot of stuff that we need to address and tweak for next time. Just because it didn't reach control room doesn't mean it wasn't happening.
It's just to build off that. So your question, Will, I didn't. My first thought was I don't have an ideal team. My thought was I want ideal communicators. I don't really care what their role is or who they are. I just want really good communicators, because it's going to be that makes that one's going to help put the plan together, and it's going to initiate that plan when we have to put it into play. And it can be a team that's 2 or 3 people, or tens or hundreds of people, depending on the size of the plan. I think of things like, one of the things that makes me think of it is right after the 9/11 attacks. So I was working at Arlington Police, and one of the new training things they came down with was we're getting rid of TIN codes. TIN codes are those things that police say 10-4, what's your 10-20? I'm 10-8. Can you give me a 10-23? Well, it turns out that DC's got a lot of different police agencies, and when that emergency happened, they couldn't all communicate because they all slightly had different TIN codes. So we went to plain English. So I was not trained on the TIN codes. And I come down here to Charleston, and they haven't learned that yet, or they're not ready to switch over yet. So they start talking in code again, and I'm like, I'm confused. If something goes bad here, I don't know what's happening because I can't understand the language. I just want to have clear communication with that plan, regardless of if it's a security guy or a meeting planner staff or a banquet staff or an outside vendor. And in that whole communication, someone's got to be working with first responders, whether it's police, fire, ambulance, whatever it is. I want open, clear communication.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, that's
Go ahead.
fascinating. Like, we're all talking the same language here. It's amazing.
I love it. I love it. And what's funny is that we thought when in this episode, I said, wow, it's gonna be really interesting to see everyone's different perspective because, you know, like I feel like in the UK is so far advanced. I mean, we in the States are like basing all of our stuff, but it's crazy how, like you said, we're all talking the same language.
Well, I think it might be. I have a question for Mark. So I heard a rumor, Mark, that I want to hold a meeting at a hotel, and we'll just say downtown London, and it's the Hilton in London. I understand that they're going to require me as the meeting planner to actually present them a safety plan before they'll book my meeting. Is that right?
I've heard the same rumor.
Okay.
And yeah, there are venues that are that proactive. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So to my knowledge, you don't have anything in the U.S. like that yet. But I thought when I first heard that, I was like, that's pretty proactive to have for a venue to say, we've got our safety plan. We want to see your safety plan so we can make sure those safety plans will work together.
No, and again, that's going to vary venue to venue, and
it will.
And to be honest, it's also personality driven. I mean, if you or I ended up working in house in a venue, we're probably likely to be the people asking everyone for a plan. So you might find that's part of it. It's definitely happening in some places. I wouldn't say it's everywhere in the UK or Ireland, but people are starting to definitely think that way. And to be honest, it'll give a venue peace of mind. They don't even have to agree with everything in it, but the fact that level of work is going into the event will have to give. If I was working in-house in the venue, it'd give me a certain peace of mind if I knew the people were planning it that well and committing it to paper and have systems and procedures.
Well, and it reduces liability, and it might reduce insurance costs down the road and things like that.
That's so true. All right, guys, there's so many questions to ask, and so I'm gonna have to whittle it down because we only got a couple of minutes left. So I'm gonna eeny, meeny, miny, moe it. Okay, well, maybe we can get this one done really, really quick. Quick tips for, we put together these plans. How do we make them quick to remember and know what to do? Because obviously sometimes these plans, they're hundreds of pages long, right? I looked at the FEMA one and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a textbook. How do you make them quick and easy to remember? What's your go-to maybe 2 or 3 tips that you have for making them easy to remember?
We do a few things with our plans. I would, if it's a long plan, say you're writing it in Word or whatever, I would hyperlink all your contents. So and this is a simple thing, this is Control K on a Mac at least, and just make it a hyperlink to the page that topic is on. We've had statutory bodies and agencies say it's the greatest thing they've ever seen to be able to that quickly find the bit they need to read. That's a really simple thing. And if you're not rushed doing your planning to submit it, you should have time to do that. The other thing I would say, and this might be taking money out of my pocket because I'm not sure many people are doing it yet, but I'll give it to you, is you can make your event management plan into a video real easy. So if you're doing an event that has a lot of layouts on it, or it has deployment positions, all that kind of stuff, you can do this thing in PowerPoint and then just export it as a video. We do it on huge parade events where I have a council chamber with 40 people. None of them are reading a 100-page plan, but I do need them to understand how this parade is going down their main street, what roads are blocked, and you can make that into a 4 or 5 minute video, and you can just see the faces taking it in that we're never ever going to read a full event management plan. And you don't need graphics geniuses to do that. I do them in here sometimes. It's literally PowerPoint, and it can be rough and ready. It doesn't need to be the most amazing graphics, but it can be really, really effective. And you're back to it. What Alan was talking about is communication. Some people absorb the information way better that way.
Yeah, I was actually going to go down that venue as well, because so a couple of ideas I have on knowing the plan or remembering the plan or not having to be overwhelmed by the plan. A couple of things are, I don't know if they're available outside the US, but there are a couple of companies here in the US that now have apps that you can put on your iPhone, and they will condense your plan onto an iPhone app. So when you open up the app, it'll say communication plan or, or bomb threat or, hurricane or weather, and you just click on it and it will start giving you the right information. So that's one thing. The other thing is back to the communication. So this is something we use in law enforcement, and it comes from the incident command system, which is part of the National Incident Management System, which may or may not come from Homeland Security. Anyway, everyone is assigned a role. So when we're doing one of our close street events, we have our incident command officer. I know this is not meeting planner talk, and that's one of the things that I'm kind of working on right now when I meet with people, is trying to change the FEMA language or the Homeland Security language into meeting planner language, because no one knows what an incident commander is when you're at your meeting of 300 window washers or whatever it is. So here, when we're doing our event, you have your incident commander, and then it breaks down from there. So the incident commander doesn't really have to remember everything. He just has to know who remembers everything. So if on our closed street festival someone gets sick, he knows who's in charge of medical. If someone in the event gets rowdy, he knows who's in charge of policing. If power goes out, he knows who's in charge of public works. So it's a matter of, hey, this is the emergency and this is where it's at. Let me know how you'd handle it, and it goes from there. So and I kind of like to think of the meeting planner. I don't know if meeting planners want this responsibility. And that's another thing that I talk about with some planners, but I always kind of consider the meeting planners the incident commander. If something goes down at their event, everyone's going to look to them. So they're the ones that has to have a really good crisis communication plan in place to make that plan work.
Wow. There's so many great resources. I just keep posting them all in the chat. If you're not joining us live, you're definitely missing out on all the resources. But if you're watching the recording, this will be down in the show links down below. There's so many resources and good ideas coming from this.
So I don't know if you want to put them on there, Will, but the two apps I was talking about, one's called Playbook. It's by a company called Venue Intelligence, and the other one is called Event Aware by Attendees. And just so full disclosure, I'm not related to those companies. I don't get anything from those companies. I just know of them. I've seen their apps I've played around with them a little bit, and they do kind of condense it and make it a little more user friendly. Of course, the plan actually has to be written behind the scenes online, in a programming mode, so that it can actually get down to your app. It's not like you can call them up and say, hey, can you create a plan and put it on my phone for me? Because it doesn't work that way.
Awesome. I'm getting all these links and posting them in as we go along. This is fantastic stuff. Okay, I had one topic I wanted to go down, but I think it might end up becoming its own episode in itself, because as I said before we got on the show, I was like, an hour is never enough to cover this topic. There's always just so much to cover, and I think we're definitely probably have to do a part 2 to cover all this sort of stuff. But I do want to slowly start wrapping up, just so then that way we can get everybody out on time. So then that way I also leave you guys a little bit of a taste for part 2. But just starting to kind of wrap up, Mark, you kind of spoiled us with your one tip, so I'm going to ask you for another tip. But let's start with you guys' one tip that you guys have for planners, whether it's safety related or not. What is your one tip when it comes? So, Mark, since you already did yours, I'll have Alan go next, and we'll come back to you for your second tip.
Cool.
So my one tip is going to be safety related. And my one tip basically is pick one thing and start with it and ask for help if you need help with it. That's it. Pick one thing, start with it, and ask for help.
Ooh.
Is that enough? Do you want more, Will?
Give us a little bit more. Like, how would you do that?
So this is the thing I get a lot of, and I think that's one of the reasons why. Just recently, I was working on an article on event safety and meeting planners and suppliers, and I couldn't get really many meeting planners to go on record. And I think the reason why is because they're embarrassed to admit they don't actually have a plan, or that they downloaded something from the internet, so they have it on paper, so that the in-house lawyers, whoever, can say, all right, well, we got a plan on paper, we're safe. And that's not what I mean by taking one step. My thing is, one of the things I always say is, hey, here's a step that's easy to take, and you're going to do it anyway. You're going to go on a site visit, and you're going to look at the meeting space, and you're going to talk about the food and beverage, and you're going to ask about room rate and whatnot. While you're walking around that hotel, just ask, hey, do you guys have an AED? Are there people who are here trained to use it? in case we have someone who has a heart attack. Boom, simple question, one thing, and now you've got something to create a safety plan with. Then the next question might be, as you're going around checking out the meeting space, yeah, this room's going to look really good for our opening speaker. Can you tell me where the emergency exits are? Are they lighted? Are they going to be accessible behind the screens that we might use for audio visual? Where's the house phone in this room in case you need to call? Boom, 2 things down. Second question, third question. I see the house phone. Can I pick it up and dial 911 if there's an emergency, or is there a number that I have to dial in-house? Because in the US, at least, a lot of hotels don't want you to call 911. They want you to let them know what's going on. And the reason why is because they'll help direct the first responders there. They know the address, they know the room locations better, they know access to those rooms better. So generally that's how they do that. And right there, and with a few minutes at a site visit, you've got 3 things on your safety plan, and now you can just keep organically build from that.
I love it. If anything, it raises more questions than it does give answers.
It raises more questions. Yeah, that's it. That's the point.
Amazing.
And that's just a simple thing. That's not any emergency planning per se. That's not worrying about a hurricane or any of that crazy stuff we might see in the media. That's just simple. Hey, if someone falls on, trips on the stair, and I need to call 911, do I go to a house phone and dial 911, or do I call? What do I do? And that starts that conversation right there. And that's not hard. It's not complicated. And it will already be part of that meeting planner's to-do list. All right? On the site visit, we're going to look at room sets, and we're going to look at room sizes, and we're going to check out the food and beverage, and we're going to make sure that we know where each meeting space has emergency exit and a house phone. So it's just adding 1 or 2 little tiny tasks.
Awesome. Cool.
Mark, I think that's pretty practical without making it too overwhelming.
Yeah, I agree 100%. All right, Mark, second tip.
Was my first tip about risk assessments?
What was his first tip?
Driven by a risk assessment, was that it?
I don't remember. I just remember that you already gave us.
Well, anyway,
that was your first tip. That was your first tip. You said write a risk assessment.
I said that a few times. Yeah. I said that a few times. So the first tip should definitely have been, if it wasn't, everything you do should be driven by a risk assessment. The second thing I would say is, and again, given talks, I give this advice a lot, is, and this isn't, you don't just do this one day, you develop this over time, but develop a system that works for you, and be consistent. And this works for an awful lot of reasons. We can go to the nth degree about when something goes wrong and you're in court. If you can show that the last 20 events you managed and planned followed the same systems, the same procedures. Take Alan's example. When you go on your site visit, do you have a template form you bring with you and you complete on every site visit to ask those questions? Make sure you think of them to ask. So have templates, have procedures, have systems, and apply them to every event you do. We're 7 years in business with this company, and we're still developing these procedures. These things change all the time. But if I have to show a body, if I tilt my camera, see all those files up there. And an awful lot of them, if I ended up in court, an awful lot of them are the exact same system and procedure. And that instills confidence. It keeps things systematic, and it gives people confidence that you follow systems and know what you're doing. Paperwork and systems will keep you from having sleepless nights and will keep you out of court. And my goal is to never be in court over something that happens at our event. If someone does get hurt at an event we're running, that's what I pay insurance for, if it's legitimate. And if someone takes a claim and our insurance company want to fight it, that file behind me, that system, that procedure, that we executed it the way we planned it, that will keep me out of court. I won't end up in court. So develop your own systems and procedures and just be consistent with them. And it's something as simple. I love Alan's one. Something simple like that. I would take exactly what Alan said and add the step of have your clipboard or your app that it's the same questions you're asking each venue every time. There you go.
They already have started because they're already checking off. Did I see a guest room?
Exactly.
Did I talk about food and beverage? Did I look at this space? Did I look at that space? Did I see the fitness center? So all they have to do is add 1 or 2 more little things. Yeah. And just like Mark said, it'll be on there each time.
Wow. Oh my gosh, this is so good. I never want this episode to end. But I do have my final question for you guys, because we do have to come to close, sadly enough. But you guys have already been sharing so many resources. I've been like furiously typing behind, and I see Mark's coming up with even more right now as we speak. But resources, Mark, you've already started to name some of them as we go along, but feel free to repeat them again. Same with Alan. But what are all your resources that you guys have that you want people to check out?
Uh, Again, I have been sharing a good few there, so feel free to share them. But I've kept the one you told me I'd have to come up with resources for the end. So I've kept what I think is one of the best ones and probably underutilized by the vast majority of people, and that is LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, get active on there, spend time building a community. I could tell you, it would be a whole other show. I can tell you about the times I've had to reach out, find people internationally that I've never met, that are subject matter experts in stuff that isn't my main thing. And the type of person, the level of expert I have found and has reached back and been able to help me out is phenomenal. It doesn't take loads of time or work. You do this over a few years, you cultivate a network, and the value in it is phenomenal. And I'm quite up on what I do. I'm pretty good at it. But even 2 days ago, I reached out on LinkedIn looking to be pointed in the right direction for some drone safety stuff. And I actually can't tell you the people I ended up talking to because some of them should not have been technically sharing what they were sharing, but they are at the cutting edge and I can't get higher on the food chain.
Bond,
so
James Bond.
It can be amazing.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. But the power in a really good international network in your field is really, really, really strong. And it's only when you've cultivated it already and you reach out and how quickly you get linked with people that are exactly who you need. And it's just happened a few times for me lately. So I would say whatever about your attitude to social media in general, from a professional perspective, if there's a community involved in what you do on LinkedIn, get on there and start engaging. It will pay off in spades when you need a favor or you need some input on something.
Well, that's a great suggestion because when you sign up for Event Icons, you get an invite right to our Event Icons LinkedIn group.
There you go.
But no, I would totally agree on LinkedIn. It's our number one platform for us, and we absolutely love it. So I can't preach LinkedIn enough as well. So that's an awesome one, Mark. And I posted all the links of all the 4,000 other resources that you shared throughout the show in the chat and down the resources.
I'm thinking out loud now.
Yeah,
so it's
awesome.
awesome.
I've been clicking on them as we've been going along so I can look at them later.
There's so much good stuff in here. So much good stuff. I didn't even know half this stuff existed. But Alan, resources, hit us with them.
So I'm not going to bore you with all the online resources because that's easy enough to Google. But one of the things I've talked about earlier about Emergency Operations Center and the police department using Homeland Security and National Incident Management Systems and Incident Command Systems and all these things. You can Google any of that. And something Mark said earlier is there's no one right plan, and go look at all that stuff. I use a FEMA when I do my speaking or some of my training. I use a FEMA model that uses a circle with 5 elements. Now, I've seen that circle with 4 elements. I've seen that circle with 6 elements, but I like the 5-element circle because I think it works well for meeting planners because there's an assessment phase, there's a planning phase, there's a an initiation phase, and there's a recovery phase, all these things. And I go through and I make the definition. I take the language from FEMA language to meeting planner language. So that's one resource. But the other resource was something that Mark touched on. I kind of like to think about it as if you're a meeting planner who needs help on something meeting planning related, what do? You might go to an MPI chapter or MPI person, PCMA, use your associations, things like that. And then one of the biggest things that I think planners are forgetting, or they ask and they get kind of a meh answer, is their partners, their supplier partners, their venues, their CVBs, their hotels. Something like a convention center or a hotel is required by law in the US to meet certain codes like fire alarms and sprinklers and things like that. So they also already probably have something with security because they don't want their guests to be robbed or they don't want people to be mugged in their parking garage. So a lot of times a planner might go to a hotel and say, hey, do you guys have something to handle X, Y, and Z? And the hotel says, yeah, sure, we got it. Don't worry about it. No, worry about it. Say, great. Let's get your plan and my plan and make sure they work together so that we can both be ready to respond when something happens. And planners don't do that right now. I think that's one of the resources they are forgetting to look at are their venues and some of their supplier partners. And I think there's a lot out there.
I love it. Definitely relying on your partners, I think, is a really good theme that we're having here throughout it, because I think definitely, as noted by all the questions we're getting from the audience, that everyone wants to know what to do and where to get this information. Now they know where to get it. You guys, this has been such an amazing episode, like so much information, and I just feel like there's a part 2, a part 3, a part 4, probably like a part 100 coming real soon. This has been so amazing, guys. Thank you both, Alan and Mark, for both being on the show.
Thank you.
Huge applause to you guys for doing everything to educate everyone. Awesome. Well, everyone who did tune in, thank you for tuning in as well. And everyone who joined us in the conversation, asked questions in the chat. You guys are the ones who fueled that conversation. If you did enjoy this episode, make sure that you subscribe over event-icons.com, because we do live broadcast this every single week. Obviously, you can tune in on your favorite podcasting platforms, on YouTube, and we're everywhere basically. But if you do want to catch the best show is live, because you get to drive the conversation, join the chat with other event professionals. So make sure to sign up at event-icons.com. But if you do also have ideas for topics and things like that, hit us up on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever it may be, #EventIcons. Let us know what kind of topics you want to hear. This was one of the most requested topics, which is why we did it. So let us know if there's something else that you want us to cover or something to expand on from this episode. But it is the end of the day, and it is time to get out of here. But thank you guys again for tuning in. Thank you, Mark and Alan, one more time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Will.
Everybody.
Thanks, Event Icons.
Yes, we'll see everybody next week on #EventIcons.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #EventIcons. To catch all the bonus content, resources mentioned, and an invite to our Facebook and LinkedIn groups, head to www.event-icons.com. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway. Just tag your post with #EventIcons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #EventIcons.